but also step back, especially if you're wearing a white shirt, because it might splatter a little. And then your shirt is ruined and you can't wear it anymore. Today we are talking about Pantry because Pantry is one of my favorite topics, and the featured Pantry item today is chickpeas. I have cans of chickpeas and other beans in my pantry at all times. I do cook both chickpeas and other beans like black beans from scratch sometimes, but I do find that having cans of beans on hand is great for easy weeknight dinners or lunches, because things like chickpeas and other beans go great in soups and stews and salads, and making bean dips like hummus, which also I buy sometimes, but also I make sometimes. So go out and buy a bunch of cans of beans and have them on hand, because your life is going to be so much better, more delicious, and easier. Today with these chickpeas, I'm making a version of Parmesan that features broccoli instead of chicken or any other meat. I was just sort of pondering a story last year and thinking of like, what could a really interesting vegetarian dinner be? And I was thinking about how like whole heads of cauliflower had become really popular, and before that it was like kale or like cauliflower steaks were really popular, and I thought, like, why has nobody done that with broccoli? And so I decided to do it, and I think it came out pretty great. So this was a head of broccoli, and I cut them lengthwise into florets. This is pretty big, but you can cut them in half and then in quarters, and if they seem kind of too big, cut them again. But what I'm looking for on this is for there to be some flat sides, because this is where the browning is gonna happen. It gets a little harder for the sort of rounded parts and the floret part to get brown, so I want there to be contact in the hot pan. Speaking of hot pans, I have a cast iron skillet, like a nice large one, 10 to 12 inches, heating in a 450-degree oven. The key, I find, to getting really nice browning on vegetables, or even like thin pieces of meat that don't take too long to cook, is preheating either my skillet, or if I'm cooking on a roasting pan, my roasting pan, or my rimmed baking sheet. You can see that this is really hot because it's smoking, which is great because that's going to jumpstart the cooking. Make sure you protect your hands. I always make sure to keep my towel, make sure it's dry, or a pot holder on the pan so I don't forget it's hot, because it's actually pretty easy to forget, even if you just took it out of the oven, which you think is probably not true, but it is true. And then add, and you hear that? That means your pan is nice and hot, and it's gonna get a nice browning on your broccoli. And I'm putting them down, at least one flat side down. You can turn them to coat a little bit. You know, yes, maybe it's a little bit dangerous with that flying oil, but I promise it'll be worth it. Just be careful. And the broccoli should fit in a nice single-ish, basically single layer into your pan, and then season with salt and pepper. And then this goes back into the oven. It's gonna take about 15 minutes to start getting brown and get mostly cooked, because all the rest of the ingredients that I'm adding either just need to melt the cheese, because it's a broccoli and chickpea parm, or just heat through the chickpeas, and well, that's it really, the sauce, I guess. So get that into the oven. It should take about 15 minutes. You can check it after about 7.5 minutes and turn them over so you get a nice even browning. Now with chicken Parmesan or other Parmesans, you usually like coat the chicken with breadcrumbs, and that gives it a nice crunch. Well, for this recipe, to make it much easier than coating broccoli and breadcrumbs and then frying it and all of that stuff, I'm making a panko or breadcrumb mixture to go that I sprinkle over the top at the end, and that gets nice and crunchy, and it's sort of, maybe it's not exactly the same as frying it, but it really adds a nice crunch. So 1/3 cup of panko. You can use regular breadcrumbs if you don't have panko, but panko is really nice and light and like super duper crunchy. And I think it adds really great texture. 1/3 cup of grated Parmesan cheese. I like to use, well, let's talk about Parmesan cheese. Real Parmesan cheese has amazing flavor. Parmigiano Reggiano is what we call for usually in the magazine. I buy it in pieces sometimes and grate it by hand, but I often do buy the pre-grated stuff from the store just because it's easier. I just make sure that it's not the fake stuff. 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. I used to be really against garlic powder, but now I feel like judicious amounts of garlic powder are kind of amazing and actually act completely differently than fresh garlic. That was a 1/4 teaspoon of dry oregano. You could certainly use fresh. I would use a 1/2 teaspoon if I was doing that. So mix that together. That gets 2 tablespoons of oil as well, because that'll help with the browning. Just because this whole thing only takes about a 1/2 hour to cook. And so you want to maximize your browning capacity because browning is delicious and also visually appealing. Mozzarella cheese. This is going to get sliced. I prefer to slice my own. This is fresh mozzarella, I think. You can use either, though I have to say that I like the regular mozzarella for melty stuff, like the low moisture, the stuff that you find in the cheese case, like with the other dairy at the supermarket, is great for stuff like this. So you can use whichever one you like. So for this recipe, you only need about 3 ounces. This is way more than that, but you know, I always like to go overboard. That's it. We're just gonna wait about another 10 minutes and then you'll see what comes next. Halfway through cooking, flip them over because they're getting really nice and brown, but you want that on both sides. And then just go back in the oven for about 7, 8 more minutes. So that's been about 15 minutes. Set the broccoli aside for a sec. I want to build the rest of the dish underneath the broccoli. It's more for like a visual thing really than anything because I wanted to be able to like highlight the broccoli and how beautiful it is and how dramatic. Just show off how great I am. Just kidding. Tomato sauce. This is store-bought marinara. We have a great recipe on our site, marthastewart.com, for like a 15-minute marinara, so you can make your own, but also step back, especially if you're wearing a white shirt, because it might splatter a little. And then your shirt is ruined and you can't wear it anymore. Then the 3 ounces of cheese, melty moths, layer that on top. I like this. I kind of got inspired by those dips where it's just like tomato sauce and cheese on top and then you melt it together and you eat it together. That was my inspiration here. It's like the cheese goes on top of the sauce so they sort of mix together. And then your chickpeas. Those could also go underneath the cheese. And then on top of that goes the cooked broccoli. Nestle it in-ish. I also thought like this dish didn't need the chickpeas, but it's adding a lot of lean protein, and you already have like some protein from the cheese, which is nice, but that's a fatty protein and you want to use too much of it. And if you're concerned about getting protein, it's a really nice way to add a little bit of additional protein and like heft, right? You could eat this with grilled bread, garlic bread if you wanted to, something like that. But I just like the heft of it. You could use white beans here as well. So that's nice. And then that breadcrumb mixture will go right on top. And this should get nice and golden in about 10 minutes in the oven. Food styling trick. Do things kind of unevenly because it just looks prettier. Of course, maybe it's not the best for eating, but you want to be able to see a little bit of the broccoli peeking out. Then it goes back in the oven and you just want to get the cheese melted, the breadcrumbs to be nice and golden brown. I cut up more cheese than I need, so I'm adding it. Why not? Back in that same 450-degree oven, should take about 10 minutes. So it is bubbling, smells fantastic. You can see those little extra pieces of cheese I added aren't hurting anything. Nice and creamy, bubbly. It does need to sit for about 10 minutes so you don't burn the top of your mouth, which I'm telling you that from experience. I did eat it too early and I burned the top of my mouth. So let's give this a couple minutes just to simmer down and then we can taste it together. Okay, so we've waited long enough. It's time to enjoy. It's like major steam action and major cheese action. I mean, I know that's good, but I feel out of control right now. I don't know how to help. That's what's good about this, right? Cheese, bowl, get some chickpeas, get a little bit more broccoli, a little more sauce. I'm completely ill-dressed to be eating this, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do it anyway because I'm super hungry and it smells. How long do you think I can keep this going on? Oh, did it go up? Yep, okay, it did. Finally came apart. It's really good. Do I have it on my face? Probably. The broccoli should be nice and tender but not mushy. Maintain some of its green, which is really great. Really getting in your vegetables. Your kids, if you have kids, will like it. If you yourself are a kid, you will like it, I promise. It's delicious. It's healthy. Let's just pretend that cheese is super healthy for you because I love cheese. It's another great pantry meal using chickpeas, one of my absolute favorites. If you want more recipes like this and all of these other great recipes that I've been sharing with you, click like and subscribe, and maybe leave a comment below. What's your favorite chickpea recipe? Have you made this recipe? Let me know if you like it.